Did Meghan Markle just get caught faking an entire Netflix scene with a pot, a ladle, and a lie? It began with the flick of a wooden spoon, a simmering pot, a clean kitchen, and Meghan Markle, dressed in a casual yet immaculate white linen blouse, her sleeves rolled just enough to signal effort, not enough to break a sweat, stirring a sauce with delicate poise. The segment lasted barely 2 minutes. In it, Meghan smiled gently, added what appeared to be a pinch of seasoning, and glanced warmly at the camera. It was a scene designed to evoke intimacy, authenticity, and domestic warmth. Viewers were meant to feel like they had been invited into the private sanctuary of the Duchess of Sussex's home. But according to Megyn Kelly, what the audience really witnessed wasn't a slice of royal domestic life. It was a well-rehearsed photo shoot masquerading as reality. And that illusion is precisely what she set out to dismantle, piece by piece. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Megyn didn't flinch when she dropped the first blow. With her signature calm but cutting delivery, she exposed what she claimed to be damning behind-the-scenes images, photos that allegedly revealed Meghan's cooking segment had been staged weeks in advance, the kitchen set styled like a showroom, and the food prepped and plated by a professional culinary team. She didn't cook, Megyn declared during her primetime commentary. She posed with cookware. It was a line that instantly went viral. For some, it felt like a petty jab. But for others, it struck a much deeper nerve, one that questioned not just Meghan Markle's authenticity, but the very way celebrity narratives are sold to the public under the guise of transparency. This wasn't the first time Meghan had found herself at the center of a controversy about image versus truth. But this incident, relatively minor on the surface, snowballed because of how perfectly it encapsulated a larger pattern of curation disguised as candor. The cooking scene was subtle, quiet, innocuous, but that was the genius of it. It didn't scream performance. It whispered, "Trust me." And when trust is broken, when the audience feels manipulated rather than included, the backlash can be explosive. The purpose of this video is not to vilify or mock Meghan Markle. It's to dig into what actually happened behind the camera of that seemingly innocent kitchen segment. What choices were made? Who prepared the food? What was filmed? What was edited? And what was left out? And why did Megyn Kelly, a woman who has weathered her own share of public firestorms, feel compelled to call it out so directly, so publicly, and with such confidence? The story doesn't begin and end with the photos. It stretches into the wider world of documentary ethics, influencer culture, and the thin line between inspiration and deception. In an era where audiences crave relatability but are fed rehearsed moments, the Meghan Netflix kitchen scene has become a case study in modern media manipulation, a masterclass in how subtle cues, natural lighting, casual clothing, soft music, a simmering pot, can seduce the viewer into accepting fiction as truth. And Megyn Kelly, whether you agree with her or not, lit a match under the illusion. Let's start by recalling the initial reactions when the Netflix episode first aired. The reviews were glowing. Social media filled with praise about how real Meghan looked. Lifestyle magazines reposted stills from the kitchen moment, applauding her choice of minimalist cookware and her mom-on-the-go aesthetic. It was aspirational, yes, but achievable. Or so it seemed. The entire framing of the series leaned heavily into the idea that Meghan was peeling back the curtain, showing us her true life. In this version of the narrative, she wasn't the Duchess in Dior. She was the wife, the mother, the friend who cooks meals from scratch while reflecting on family and purpose. It was crafted to counter the narrative of the diva Duchess, cold, demanding, out of touch, that had been pushed by the tabloid press for years. But then the story cracked. It began quietly. Whispers of staffers who had worked on the production, anonymous comments posted to industry forums, blurry photos that didn't match the tone of the polished Netflix aesthetic. A catering invoice here, a leaked production schedule there. And finally, the images that Megyn Kelly broadcast to her audience. Images that, if verified, would suggest that the kitchen scene wasn't a spontaneous, candid moment, but a pre-lit, blocked, scripted piece of content filmed well in advance with the help of stylists and chefs. These weren't paparazzi shots. They were internal, and that's what made them powerful. They suggested intent, not improvisation. One image in particular raised eyebrows. Megyn standing in the same position seen in the Netflix episode, but surrounded by a full crew, studio lights above her head, and a table lined with perfectly plated food not yet touched. According to Megyn, this photo was taken days before the segment aired, meaning it wasn't live and it wasn't organic. She backed her claim with timeline comparisons, production metadata, and corroborating sources who had worked on similar sets. The sauce Megyn stirred, allegedly prepared hours earlier by a sous chef hired just for the scene. The vegetables in the background, carefully arranged by a food stylist known for prepping spreads for magazine covers. None of this would matter if the segment had been presented as a visual interlude or even a food shoot. But it wasn't. It was packaged as part of Meghan and Harry's real life. And therein lies the controversy. Megyn Kelly's takedown resonated because she didn't simply call Meghan a fraud. She didn't yell. She dissected. She laid out the evidence methodically, allowing viewers to draw their own conclusions. Her tone wasn't angry, it was disappointed. And that disappointment echoed across demographics. It wasn't just conservatives or royalists who felt misled. Even moderate viewers, who had once supported Meghan's attempt to break free from the monarchy and build her own narrative, began to question how much of her image was carefully sculpted performance. The deeper question this raises isn't about soup or spoons. It's about the relationship between celebrity and trust. In the influencer age, the currency isn't just fame, it's authenticity. Audiences are no longer content with stars who are simply beautiful or wealthy. They want to believe these figures are just like them, that they cry, laugh, struggle, and cook dinner on a Wednesday night. So when someone presents a version of themselves that turns out to be stage-managed, the betrayal feels personal. It's not about the food. It's about the lie. And for Meghan, a woman who has built an entire second act around reclaiming her voice, the revelation that this moment may have been manufactured cuts deep into her core message. Because if even her most mundane, relatable moments are artificial, what does that say about the rest of her story? Are the emotions real? The struggles? The anecdotes about raising children and navigating post-royal life? Or are they all, as Meghan implied, carefully engineered to manipulate sympathy, admiration, or control over public perception? This video is about more than one cooking segment. It's about the modern media machine and the people it elevates. It's about how moments are crafted, how meaning is created, and how trust can be lost in 10 seconds of stirring. It's about the power of image and the consequences when that image begins to crack. And most importantly, it's about the moment someone with a platform finally said, "This isn't right." Whether you like Megyn Kelly or loathe her, whether you believe she's sincere or opportunistic, her intervention forced a much-needed conversation. And that conversation continues today. Now we go deeper. In the next section, we'll dissect the original Netflix scene itself, moment by moment. We'll analyze what was shown, what was implied, and what may have been quietly concealed beneath the surface. You'll hear from culinary insiders, production experts, and even fans who felt deceived. By the end, you'll have the tools to judge the moment for yourself. Not based on emotion, but on evidence. Are you ready to look past the pot and into the production? There's a particular kind of silence that follows a masterful illusion. It's not the absence of sound, but the stillness of belief. That's what the Netflix cooking segment accomplished when it first aired as part of Meghan and Harry's documentary series. Viewers didn't question it. They absorbed it. It was serene, soft-lit, and filled with domestic energy, the image of a woman reclaiming her space, her time, her voice. In that brief montage, Meghan Markle didn't say much. She didn't need to. The setting did all the talking. It was meant to look like a casual day in the kitchen. A light, natural breeze blew the linen curtains. The countertops gleamed but weren't so sterile they looked untouched. There was a basket of vegetables on the counter, tomatoes, zucchini, eggplant, all suggesting a Mediterranean diet filled with health and intentional living. A cutting board with a knife and herbs hinted that the preparation had just begun, as if viewers had been invited into the middle of her cooking process. The camera didn't stay fixed. It moved in gentle pans, capturing angles that felt spontaneous. The audio design was elegant. You could hear a faint bubbling of the sauce, a subtle clink of utensils, the natural ambience of a peaceful afternoon. It all seemed so believable. But that was the point. The kitchen segment was less than 3 minutes long in its final cut. And yet, it left a lasting impression. Meghan was shown ladling soup, briefly stirring a pot, and gently placing a slice of bread in a rustic-looking tray next to a finished meal. There were no elaborate instructions, no real-time cooking. Just simple gestures wrapped in warmth. Most audiences didn't notice anything strange. On the contrary, many felt they had just witnessed a rare glimpse into the Duchess's private world. This wasn't Meghan in an interview chair. This was Meghan at home, hair tied back, apron on, living her truth. Or so we thought. It's worth dissecting the anatomy of that scene, not just for what it showed, but for what it suggested. Documentary filmmaking thrives on implication. A pot of soup on the stove, paired with a shot of fresh herbs being chopped, implies home cooking. A woman gently seasoning food while soft music plays implies maternal involvement, domestic authenticity, groundedness. Yet none of these moments proved Meghan actually cooked that meal, or even touched it beyond the camera's reach. But because they were edited seamlessly and backed with music that evoked simplicity and sincerity, they felt real. And herein lies the trick. This segment did not drop in isolation. It was situated carefully within a broader narrative arc of the Netflix documentary, which was about control, privacy, and redefinition. Meghan and Harry were reintroducing themselves to the world, not as working royals but as individuals forging a new life in California. The kitchen scene wasn't just symbolic of domesticity, it was symbolic of freedom. Here was Meghan, free from palace constraints, choosing what she wanted to do, cooking what she wanted to cook, surrounded by love and intention. Except, according to what we now know, almost none of it was spontaneous. In the weeks that followed the Netflix premiere, fans on both sides of the Sussex debate began to rewatch segments, analyzing and sharing timestamps, comparing details. In the kitchen scene, Meghan is seen wearing the same outfit in two slightly different lighting conditions, suggesting different shooting times edited to appear continuous. One camera angle reveals a reflection in a pan, what looks like a boom mic and a crew member's sneaker, quickly glossed over in the final cut but clear to those who slowed the footage. One particularly sharp-eyed Reddit user even pointed out that the knife on the cutting board never moves, suggesting that either no actual chopping was done, or it was reset for every take. The emotional reaction to the scene wasn't accidental. Every visual element was curated for emotional manipulation. The camera didn't just film Meghan cooking, it lovingly lingered on her face, her hands, the delicate way she touched each object. In one shot, she holds a ladle as if it's a microphone, pausing mid-stir to smile slightly toward the camera. There's a performative quality to it, subtle but deliberate. It doesn't feel like someone unaware of being filmed. It feels like someone acutely aware of what that footage will say about them once it's out in the world. Yet for all its softness, the power of that scene was undeniable. On social media, fans called it the most relatable Meghan moment ever. TikTok compilations were made with Meghan's kitchen scene set to music, some calling her the ultimate domestic goddess. Lifestyle magazines ran entire spreads about how to recreate Meghan's simple and elegant cooking style, listing cookware she used in the segment, even though most of those items weren't used in any real cooking at all. It wasn't about functionality. It was about aesthetic. That aesthetic sold magazine covers, Instagram posts, and public trust. And then Megyn Kelly broke the spell. When Meghan went live with her exposé, many dismissed it at first as just another political pundit taking a swipe at Meghan Markle. But those who watched closely noticed she wasn't just making an offhand comment. She brought visuals. She referenced timelines. She asked pointed questions. Why was there a catering truck visible in an unedited production photo? Why were crew lists leaked that included 2 food stylists and a head chef when no meal prep was shown on camera? Why was Meghan's wristwatch visible in one shot and gone in the next? None of this was bombastic. Meghan was measured, controlled, and that made it more damning. Because it wasn't just opinion, it was analysis. She went scene by scene, explaining how lighting changes suggested multiple takes, how the exact consistency of the soup didn't change even after being stirred, and how the entire setting looked more like a showroom than a functioning kitchen. There was no clutter, no signs of real use. Not even the stray drops of sauce on the stovetop that every home cook inevitably leaves behind. It was pristine, polished, perfect. Too perfect. This wasn't about catching Meghan in a lie about a recipe. It was about the contrast between what the scene implied and what it actually represented. For someone who has so often claimed to want control over her own story, Meghan's use of such heavily staged segments raised questions about whether that control is being used to tell the truth, or to manufacture a more palatable version of it. But why does any of this matter? Why dissect a harmless 3-minute cooking scene? Because it's never just about the kitchen. It's about trust. When public figures offer us their vulnerability, their simplicity, their so-called realness, we instinctively lean in. We want to see the person behind the title. We want to feel that we, too, could connect with someone who seems so far removed by wealth, fame, and royalty. That's the promise this scene made. And that's the promise Megyn Kelly exposed as false. It's important to understand that the power of documentary storytelling rests in the unsaid. When someone presents you with footage of a woman cooking, they don't need to say, "She made this meal from scratch." Your brain fills in the gaps. You assume. You trust. That's where the betrayal sits. Because the segment doesn't lie with words, it lies by implication. And when someone calls that out, as Megyn did, it forces a reckoning. Not just with Megyn, but with how we as viewers are complicit in accepting illusion as reality. Megyn's critique wasn't just a takedown, it was a cultural mirror. It challenged viewers to ask how often they've been fooled by good lighting, thoughtful editing, and a soft soundtrack. And perhaps more importantly, it asked why the truth wasn't good enough. Why didn't Megyn simply say, "This meal was prepared by a chef, but it's one of our favorites"? Why not invite the chef into the frame as a collaborator instead of pretending the meal was hers alone? Why the need for the charade? The answer lies in narrative control. By appearing to be everything, wife, mother, chef, philanthropist, feminist, victim, rebel, Megyn maintains power over her own story. But when even the smallest pieces of that story turn out to be staged, the whole structure begins to look fragile. And that's what makes the cooking scene so dangerous. Not because it's false, but because it's representative of a larger trend, the performance of authenticity. In the next section, we will examine exactly how Megyn Kelly deconstructed this moment in her show, and why her words hit harder than many expected. We'll dive into her commentary, the evidence she presented, and the larger media conversation that erupted in its wake. Because whether you believe Megyn or not, what she revealed, and how she revealed it, forced millions to rewatch a scene they thought they understood. Now, we look at how that illusion was shattered. For years, Megyn Kelly has never been one to retreat from controversy. Whether seated at a news anchor desk or behind a podcast microphone, her commentary slices through mainstream consensus like a scalpel, controlled, deliberate, and designed to leave a mark. But even seasoned watchers of her show weren't prepared for what happened the day she turned her attention to Meghan Markle's Netflix cooking scene. This wasn't a casual side comment or a fleeting hot take buried in a segment about Hollywood hypocrisy. No, this was a full frontal deconstruction. And Megyn didn't just criticize, it was as if she laid the scene on a surgical table and began to peel it apart, layer by layer. The broadcast began like many others. A calm tone, a composed presence. But the moment Meghan Markle's name was uttered, the room seemed to sharpen. The energy changed. A photograph flashed across the screen, not one viewers had seen in the Netflix special. It showed Megyn standing in the same now iconic kitchen, but with an unmistakable array of production equipment visible in the background. Studio lights beamed down from the ceiling. A catering cart stood just out of frame. A crew member, clipboard in hand, was visible adjusting something behind the counter. The image wasn't grainy or speculative. It was crystal clear. And that was the point. Megyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't rant. What she did was far more effective. She allowed the evidence to do the speaking. Holding the photo in front of her, she paused. "This," she said plainly, "isn't authenticity. This is choreography." Then came the breakdown. Using a multi-angle presentation, Megyn shifted between frames from the Netflix episode and the unreleased production stills she claimed were sourced from an individual who worked on the set. The contrast was jarring. In the public version, the scene was washed in warm, inviting tones, soft yellows and earth colors that radiated calm. In the leaked versions, the color palette was harsher, washed in the cold white of industrial lighting, as crew members milled around holding cue sheets and camera rigs. Nothing about it screamed home. It screamed production. Reactions poured in from across the media landscape. Some anchors dismissed Megyn's breakdown as petty, arguing that all documentaries are polished and edited, and this one was no different. Others defended Megyn, claiming the focus on her cooking scene was another example of relentless scrutiny unfairly targeted at a woman who has spent years under the microscope. But even those who supported Megyn had to concede. Something about the way the kitchen moment had been framed did feel off. And Megyn's visual breakdown had made that impossible to ignore. Then came the audience feedback. Megyn's segment racked up millions of views across social platforms within 48 hours. Hashtags like #FakeKitchen and #StageSoup began trending. Satirical videos emerged showing parody versions of the segment, with actresses mimicking Megyn's movements in slow motion, stirring air or plastic food as exaggerated lighting rigs loomed above. But beyond the humor, there was serious discussion brewing beneath. Audiences began asking themselves uncomfortable questions. If this scene was staged, what else in the series had been manipulated? Were the candid moments with Harry also orchestrated? Were the confessional shots really raw emotion, or planned narrative arcs? Meghan's ability to tap into that doubt, to name it, and to present hard visual evidence turned her from just a critic to a cultural clarifier. She voiced what many had suspected but didn't have the proof or confidence to say aloud. And all of this, she pointed out, would have been avoided if the production had simply told the truth. Meghan offered a solution live on air. Just say it was a styled cooking segment, she said. People wouldn't care. Say you were recreating a favorite family recipe with help from a chef. Say you wanted to celebrate food as an aesthetic, not a process. That would have been fine. But don't tell me you're showing me real life and then dress it up like a Bon Appetit cover shoot. In that single point, she framed the entire debate not as an attack on Meghan's character, but as a call for media honesty. It wasn't about disliking Meghan. It was about disliking deception, especially when it's sold in packaging labeled truth. What made Meghan's takedown especially effective wasn't just the content, it was the delivery. Calm, cold, and clinical. There was no shouting match, no dramatics. She treated the scene like a case file and dissected it with the precision of someone who had done this before. And because of that, she made it impossible for viewers to walk away without at least asking themselves, had I been fooled? In the days following the segment, producers close to the Sussexes reportedly reached out to Netflix executives to discuss the backlash. While no public statement was issued, several entertainment journalists noted that the controversy had dented the credibility of the documentary and led to internal discussion about how similar scenes would be presented in future episodes or productions. But the real fallout wasn't inside boardrooms, it was online, in homes, in conversations between friends and strangers. People who had once admired Meghan's poise began questioning whether any of it was real. Others doubled down in defense, suggesting that even if the scene was staged, the message it carried still mattered. The divide grew. And at the center of that divide was Megyn Kelly's voice, steady, unyielding, and backed by receipts. She didn't just call out a moment. She shifted a narrative. And that shift was seismic. In the next section, we'll dive into the leaked photos and documents that formed the foundation of Meghan's claims. We'll examine what those behind-the-scenes images really showed, who captured them, and what implications they carry for the future of celebrity transparency. Because if the truth of one cooking scene can collapse under scrutiny, it begs the question, what other parts of Meghan's image might unravel under the same light? There are moments when a single photograph can rewrite an entire narrative. That's exactly what happened when images began surfacing, first in whispers, then in waves, photos that painted a very different picture of Meghan Markle's Netflix kitchen moment. The first to break public ground did so not through a gossip site or salacious tabloid, but on Megyn Kelly's show, where they were broadcast with methodical precision. Viewers weren't shown blurry paparazzi shots or out-of-context glimpses. They were presented with crisp, clear images, framed and focused by someone on the inside. Someone who had access. Someone who wanted the world to know the truth. The first photo Meghan displayed was deceptively simple. Meghan stood near a stove, angled slightly toward the camera, ladle in hand. At first glance, it seemed similar to the image presented in the Netflix documentary. But in this version, something was different. The lighting was harsh, clinical, not the golden glow of a home kitchen, but the flat whitewash of overhead production lighting. In the upper right corner, a boom mic peeked into frame. A man wearing a headset stood in the background, clipboard in hand, motioning towards something off-screen. And there, next to Meghan, sat a table laden with identical bowls of food, each dish seemingly identical to the next, arranged with a precision that suggested not appetite but symmetry. This was not a family kitchen. This was a set. More images followed. One showed a crew member adjusting the sleeve of Meghan's shirt before a take. Another displayed a staging board featuring notes, including shot angles, lighting cues, and wardrobe adjustments. A third image showed two chefs, not Meghan, standing at the counter arranging garnish on a serving plate. They were dressed in black aprons, wearing food-safe gloves, and speaking to a producer who appeared to be confirming continuity. The most damning photo, however, was a wide shot. It revealed the entire setup, 3 cameras for standing lights with diffusion filters, sound rigging, and a makeup artist crouched beside a drawer just out of the Netflix camera's sightline. On the counter sat a row of fresh ingredients, still in their packaging. Nothing had been chopped. Nothing had been stirred. The sauce that Meghan was later shown mixing appeared in one of the containers, still sealed with catering tape. This wasn't cooking. It was composition. The question then turned to origin. Who took these images, and why were they leaked? According to sources close to Megyn Kelly's production team, the photos were shared by a person involved in the pre-production phase of the Netflix docuseries, someone hired on a temporary contract to assist with set coordination. This individual, who requested anonymity out of fear of professional repercussions, claimed to have been unsettled by the way the scene was framed in the final product. The public deserves to know when they're being sold fiction, the source allegedly stated. We were told from the beginning this was a lifestyle segment, not a documentary moment. But when I saw how it was marketed after editing, as if it was a real day in her life, I knew that crossed a line. That distinction between a styled lifestyle segment and an authentic documentary scene became the foundation of the debate. In the world of entertainment, plenty of visuals are staged. No one expects a cooking show host to prepare an entire meal in real time during a 22-minute episode. But the difference here was context. Meghan and Harry's Netflix series wasn't marketed as stylized entertainment. It was positioned as a raw, unfiltered look into their private world. The kitchen moment was offered as an authentic slice of daily life, unembellished and honest. The leaked materials revealed that this was far from the truth. Metadata embedded in the images backed the claims. Timestamps confirmed that the shots were taken 3 weeks before the Netflix episode premiered. Additional documentation reviewed by media experts showed that filming schedules had blocked off 2 full production days for this one segment, both labeled staged domestic scenes. Catering invoices and crew rosters further supported the claims, listing food stylists, set decorators, and a culinary director hired specifically for the kitchen portion. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer it became that every visual detail had been mapped with near military precision. The vegetables were chosen for color contrast. The pot was selected for its reflective properties. Even Meghan's wardrobe was coordinated with the kitchen's palette. Soft whites, olive greens, neutral earth tones, all selected to create a soothing, aspirational atmosphere. Once these revelations began circulating online, more industry insiders stepped forward. A veteran food stylist, who had worked on dozens of commercials and magazine shoots, spoke under condition of anonymity and confirmed that the kitchen scene bore all the trademarks of professional staging. You can always tell, she said. The way the vegetables sit, the glisten on the sauce, the absence of mess. That's not cooking. That's styling. You're not making food to eat. You're making food for a lens. This expert further noted that the steam seen rising from the pot in one shot likely came from a small, hidden steam generator, a common trick in the industry to simulate heat without risking camera fog or burning the talent. In other words, the food might not even have been hot. But the most revealing details weren't visual. They were procedural. The source who leaked the images also shared notes from internal planning meetings in which production staff discussed how to maximize intimacy cues during filming. That phrase, intimacy cues, was underlined. The team reportedly brainstormed ways to make the kitchen feel lived in, without showing actual mess or clutter. Suggestions included slightly rumpled tea towels, an open cookbook with handwritten notes, allegedly written by a PA hours before filming, and a coffee mug with lipstick on the rim, though it's unclear whether that made the final cut. This was not deception in the sense of deepfakes or digital manipulation. It was more subtle, more psychological. It was emotional manipulation. The goal wasn't to trick your eyes, it was to trick your instincts. To make you feel something familiar, nostalgic, warm, comfortable, so that you would believe everything else you were told. When these behind-the-scenes photos were finally published across independent outlets, the public response was immediate. Comment sections filled with betrayal. Not rage, necessarily, but disillusionment. The kind of disappointment that comes when you realize something you once admired was crafted to make you admire it. Viewers felt not just misled but played. Many expressed that they had rewatched the scene after seeing the photos and noticed things they hadn't before: Meghan's overly precise posture, the untouched state of the ingredients, the almost too perfect gleam of the countertop. Even longtime supporters of Meghan began asking uncomfortable questions. Why go to such lengths to present a falsehood? Why not just be transparent about staging a scene for aesthetic purposes? Was there pressure from Netflix to maintain a certain image? Or was this Meghan's own doing? An extension of the brand she has meticulously constructed since stepping away from the royal family? Some pointed to patterns. The Oprah interview, with its tightly controlled visuals. The Spotify podcast segments, heavily edited and scripted despite being marketed as organic conversations. Public appearances that felt more curated than candid. All of these added fuel to the idea that Meghan's entire media presence was a performance wrapped in the language of truth. And yet, none of this would have reached the scale it did without the visual confirmation provided by the leaked materials. Photos don't argue. They don't rationalize. They don't equivocate. They just show. And what they showed in this case was damning. Megyn Kelly's use of the images was strategic. She didn't bombard viewers with speculation. She let the photos speak first, then built her case with precise language. She knew that in today's media landscape, people are wary of words, but they still trust their eyes. And these photos, regardless of one's feelings toward Meghan, made one thing undeniably clear. The scene was constructed, not inspired, not spontaneous, constructed. In a single segment, the illusion of authenticity cracked open. The documentary wasn't a window. It was a mirror, angled and lit to reflect what the audience wanted to see. And behind that mirror stood a full production crew, carefully orchestrating every detail. In the next section, we'll shift focus to the culinary professionals who actually created the food scene in the Netflix segment. Who were they? What role did they play? And why weren't they credited for their work? Because while Meghan stirred a pot on camera, it was others who did the labor behind the scenes, and their silence speaks volumes. The smell of freshly cooked food has a peculiar ability to evoke memory. It calls to mind childhood dinners, family celebrations, and moments of comfort. In cinema and television, food scenes are designed to capture that feeling, warmth, connection, and authenticity. But what if the meal you're watching wasn't cooked by the person on screen at all? What if the real labor was hidden, and the final product credited to someone who never so much as chopped an onion? That's precisely the accusation now facing Meghan Markle's Netflix kitchen scene, and at the center of it lies an invisible culinary team whose work was consumed not just by the cast, but by millions of viewers who had no idea they even existed. When Megyn Kelly aired her now viral takedown of Meghan's cooking segment, she didn't only rely on leaked photographs and production notes. She also cited credible sources within the food styling industry, an often overlooked but vital arm of television production, especially for segments involving meals. One of those sources provided detailed insight into who actually prepared the meals shown during the docuseries and how their work was quietly erased from the final product. The team, as it turns out, included 2 seasoned chefs, 1 culinary director, and a food stylist renowned in Hollywood for making dishes camera-ready. These were not assistants or background staff. These were professionals with resumes that included major studio campaigns, cooking segments for high-profile talk shows, and even Oscar night banquet preparation. They were brought in specifically for this scene, not to teach Meghan how to cook, but to create something that looked like she had. Interviews with insiders paint a striking picture of how the scene came together. First, there was Chef Alana Reyes, a private chef and consultant known for her minimalist, organic-style presentations. Though not named in the credits of the documentary, multiple insiders confirm she was hired under a subcontracting agreement through a California-based culinary management company. Her role was to create a full vegetarian meal that matched the aesthetic direction laid out in Netflix's pre-production meetings. Rustic, simple, warm, with Mediterranean tones and California influences. But it wasn't just about flavor. It was about visual impact. The dish wasn't made to be eaten, said a source who worked directly on set. It was made to look eaten. There's a difference. Reyes and her assistant began working early in the morning on the day of the shoot. Using high-end organic ingredients provided by the production team, they prepared 3 full versions of the same meal. One was meant to look raw and untouched for beginning shots. The second was semi-prepared to simulate mid-cooking scenes. The third was fully plated for the final reveal. At no point, according to the source, did Meghan participate in the food's preparation beyond a few instructed gestures once cameras rolled. But Reyes wasn't working alone. She was joined by an industry food stylist who had worked with names like Gwyneth Paltrow and Reese Witherspoon. Her job wasn't to cook, but to cure it. She used tricks of the trade, brushing oil on vegetables to make them glisten, strategically placing herbs to give the illusion of spontaneity, and inserting cardboard beneath dishes to elevate the food in bowls for better visual balance. These behind-the-scenes choices weren't dishonest in and of themselves. In fact, they're common in the entertainment industry. But what made this instance controversial was the absence of attribution. Nowhere in the documentary were these professionals acknowledged. Their work was presented as Meghan's, And that choice, intentional or not, became the crux of the ethical storm. "It's not about ego," said a food stylist familiar with the case. "It's about transparency. When the camera implies someone made a meal and they didn't, that's misleading. And when that someone is using the scene to build public trust, it becomes deception." In the leaked production logs from the shoot, several food preparation tasks are clearly assigned to specific crew. Items like final sauce texture, garnish sprinkle for final close-up, and steam application are all attributed to names other than Meghan Markle. In fact, Meghan's name only appears under on-camera handshots, indicating that her role was entirely visual. She wasn't baking bread. She was pretending to arrange slices of it. Multiple members of the culinary team reportedly signed non-disclosure agreements that prevented them from speaking out publicly, but the evidence of their involvement was not buried deeply. Procurement receipts show bulk orders of ingredients sent not to Meghan's residence, but to an off-site prep kitchen. Invoices for labor hours reveal meal testing sessions conducted days prior to the Netflix shoot, sessions Meghan did not attend. One assistant chef described it as a high-profile lifestyle shoot disguised as a personal moment. One crew member who broke silence anonymously said the dissonance between what was filmed and what aired left them deeply uncomfortable. "I've worked on campaigns for years," the individual said. "But there's usually a wink, some acknowledgement that this is stylized content. In this case, we were told directly the audience needs to believe Meghan made this meal. That's what made it feel wrong." Adding to the sense of misdirection was the tone of the segment itself. Meghan is shown gently laughing with someone off-screen as she stirs, suggesting intimacy and spontaneity. But according to those present, these moments were staged with multiple takes. Meghan's expressions, her actions, even her pacing between cuts were directed and timed. "She nailed the choreography," the crew members said. "It was just never cooking." The ethical questions that arise here are not new. They echo debates around influencer content, brand authenticity, and what consumers are owed when viewing media promoted as real life. But when the person at the center is a globally recognizable figure whose public narrative hinges on transparency and overcoming misinformation, the stakes are elevated. And then there's the issue of erasure. The chefs and stylists involved in the scene did not receive screen credit. Their names are absent from the Netflix episode's end crawl, absent from press mentions, and certainly absent from the public's understanding of how that meal was created. In the world of professional cooking and styling, this kind of exclusion is more than a snub. It's an intentional flattening of labor. It turns skilled work into aesthetic backdrop, and it hands credit to a figure whose brand benefits from the illusion of self-sufficiency. For Meghan, the implications are significant. In public speeches, she has often championed women's empowerment, particularly the recognition of invisible labor. Her own mother's work ethic is a cornerstone of her personal mythology. But if she chose to showcase a domestic scene rooted entirely in others' work without attribution, it directly contradicts the very value she claims to promote. In the wake of the controversy, some voices in the food world have begun speaking out, not necessarily to criticize Meghan, but to raise awareness about how common this kind of erasure is in celebrity content. On social media, hashtags like #CreditTheCooks began trending, with chefs and food stylists posting about projects where their work had been co-opted or misrepresented. One notable post came from a prominent Los Angeles-based chef who, without naming Meghan directly, wrote, "Don't let people borrow your talent and wear it like it's theirs. You worked for it. You earned it. You deserve the credit." The silence from Meghan's team only amplified the discussion. No clarification, no acknowledgement, no correction. Just continued promotion of the scene as a genuine moment in her day-to-day life. The official narrative remained unchanged, even as the evidence piled up that someone else had made the meal, styled the food, arranged the props, and constructed the moment. There's a bitter irony in all this. In her attempt to appear relatable and grounded, Meghan may have ended up revealing the very opposite. Not because she used help plenty of people do, but because she claimed not to. She let the world believe a fiction, then stayed silent as professionals whose hands had created that moment were pushed into the shadows. In storytelling, the people behind the curtain matter. The unsung laborers, the creatives who shape moments from the background, deserve more than a paycheck. They deserve truth. When that truth is ignored, it's not just a betrayal of them. It's a betrayal of the audience, too. In the next section, we'll examine the infamous 10-second scene that started it all, Meghan stirring a pot. What really happened in that moment? And how did such a brief visual become the eye of a media storm? Because sometimes it only takes one gesture, one illusion, to break a spell. It was barely 10 seconds long. No dialogue, no fanfare, just a simple shot of Meghan Markle standing in front of a pot on the stove, lifting a ladle, stirring gently, and offering a subtle smile to the camera. On its own, the moment seemed innocent, almost too quiet to matter. It came and went in the Netflix documentary with little build-up and no voiceover commentary. But those 10 seconds have since become one of the most dissected, mocked, and symbolically charged visuals in Meghan Markle's entire media portfolio. Why? Because that single action, just 10 seconds of stirring, was the moment the illusion cracked. The moment the audience began to realize they weren't being shown life. They were being sold a story. Before Megyn Kelly's breakdown, few viewers paid close attention to the stirring scene. It was just another transitional shot in a documentary flooded with soft-focus B-roll and music-driven montages. But as soon as Megyn called out the moment specifically, highlighting it as emblematic of performance without purpose, it became the centerpiece of a cultural dissection. Suddenly, everyone wanted to see it again. Everyone wanted to know if what she was saying could be seen in the footage itself. And when people looked closer, they saw it. The stirring was deliberate but awkward. Megyn didn't seem at ease with the ladle in her hand. Her grip was light, almost hesitant, like someone holding a borrowed tool rather than a familiar one. The motion itself was shallow, barely grazing the surface of the pot's contents. The food inside didn't shift or slosh. No steam rose. No aroma was suggested. It looked inert, staged. The sauce appeared gelatinous, as if it had been sitting out too long. And Megyn's gaze, rather than focused on the food, was fixated just off camera, toward the director, the monitor, or a cue. This wasn't someone immersed in a task. This was someone performing an idea of a task. And the internet noticed. TikTok creators began uploading slowed-down versions of the moment, layering sarcastic commentary over the clip. Some joked, "This is the kind of cooking I do when DoorDash is already on the way." Others superimposed thought bubbles above Megyn's head, imagining lines like, "Am I doing this right? Or did I stir enough to look real?" A popular parody showed the same 10-second stirring looped repeatedly for a full minute while the caption read, "Coming this fall, the Meghan Markle method. Pretend cooking for the camera." But the humor was just the surface. Beneath the memes was a deeper cultural reaction. A mix of disappointment, mockery, and critical analysis. People weren't just laughing at the awkwardness of the stir. They were questioning the motive behind including it in the first place. Why was this moment, out of all possible moments in Megyn's life, chosen for the final cut of a documentary marketed as authentic? What was it meant to signify? The answer lies in what the stir was supposed to symbolize. It wasn't about the food. It was about domesticity. It was about Megyn claiming a role often denied to women in positions of fame, ordinary, everyday nurturer. By showing her cooking, even briefly, the documentary was inviting viewers to see her as just another mother making dinner, not a global celebrity under a spotlight. But here's the issue: that narrative only works if the moment feels real. When it doesn't, it backfires. Once viewers realized the food was likely prepared by a professional, the pot had no steam, and the motion seemed performative, the entire scene shifted from endearing to engineered. And that shift was powerful. It made audiences question not only that one scene but the entire storytelling framework of the documentary. Worse yet, the 10-second stir became a symbol for something broader, a public figure trying to simulate relatability. That's a dangerous line to walk in the current media environment, where audiences are more skeptical than ever. In a world saturated with influencers, algorithms, and curated content, the hunger for authenticity has never been greater. People don't just want to see a celebrity smile. They want to believe that smile means something. And when they feel lied to, even in something as small as a cooking gesture, they react. The fallout from that clip was immediate and widespread. Hashtags like #MegynStirs and #FakeCookingScene exploded across platforms. Comment threads under the original documentary on Netflix's own social channels began to fill with questions. Did she actually make the food? Why is she barely stirring? That sauce hasn't moved an inch. What started as snark turned into genuine public scrutiny. Even non-political viewers, people who had never taken sides in the royal drama, began asking, what else was staged? Major YouTube commentary channels picked up on the stir. Some produced frame-by-frame analyses, pointing out discrepancies in the lighting, Meghan's oddly rigid wrist posture, and the food's consistency. Others contacted chefs and stylists who'd worked on food commercials and asked them to break down the scene like a forensic investigator would dissect a crime video. The conclusion was near unanimous. This wasn't real cooking. It was a simulated task designed for optics. One segment aired by a British news station invited two culinary professionals to recreate the scene. They attempted to mimic Meghan's 10-second stir using room temperature sauce and a matching pot. The result? The food looked exactly the same because the food was never intended to be stirred. It was an image, not a meal. The metaphor here didn't go unnoticed. Social critics began using the scene as an allegory for Meghan's entire public rebrand post-royal exit. Just as the stir was shallow, brief, and ineffective, critics argued, so too was her attempt to present herself as an unfiltered everwoman. It wasn't the motion that mattered, it was the performance of the motion. Not what was done, but what it looked like was being done. And that, more than anything, became the root of the controversy. Because in that 10-second window, the audience was not shown reality. They were shown a pretense of it. And the very act of pretending to be real, when framed as actual truth, becomes a betrayal. Especially when trust is your currency. Documentaries trade on credibility. The audience grants access to their emotional bandwidth because they believe what they're seeing is raw, unpolished life. Once that trust is broken, even with something as small as a ladle in a pot, everything that follows is viewed through a filter of suspicion. In this sense, the 10-second stir became Meghan's Wizard of Oz moment, the point when the curtain was pulled back and people saw the levers and gears behind the spectacle. It didn't matter how polished the production was. Once audiences realized the illusion, they couldn't unsee it. And Meghan didn't respond. There was no clarification, no acknowledgement of staging, no behind-the-scenes correction. Her silence was interpreted by many as either indifference or strategic avoidance. Either way, it only deepened the impression that the entire segment had been manufactured with the hope no one would look too closely. That silence allowed Megyn Kelly's interpretation to dominate the public discourse, unchallenged. And Meghan had been ruthless in her framing. This wasn't a woman making a meal, she said. This was a woman stirring nothing and calling it authenticity. That sentence reverberated across headlines, because it cut deeper than satire. It pointed to a larger cultural concern, how often we, as viewers, are given gestures instead of substance, and how often those gestures are accepted, even praised, until someone brave or cynical calls them out. In the end, that 10-second moment of motionless stirring did more damage to Meghan's credibility than hours of interviews could have ever repaired. It crystallized the tension between who she claims to be and how she presents herself to the world. It forced audiences to confront the possibility that much of what they believed about her might be just as staged. In the next section, we'll examine the broader idea of authenticity as a brand, how it's constructed, marketed, and exploited by public figures. Because the 10-second stir didn't just unravel a kitchen scene. It unraveled the core promise of Meghan's reintroduction to the world, that this time, she would show us who she really was. In the world of modern media, authenticity is no longer just a personal trait. It's a commodity, a brand strategy, a narrative structure. It is the one thing audiences crave above all else in an age of filters, editing, marketing teams, and tightly controlled public personas. And for Meghan Markle, authenticity has been both her armor and her weapon, used to shield her from criticism and wielded to build influence and emotional rapport. But that very same image is fragile, because once it's revealed to be curated rather than lived, it can collapse in on itself faster than any tabloid smear. Since stepping away from the royal family, Meghan has positioned herself not merely as a public figure, but as a symbol of self-liberation, vulnerability, and truth. In nearly every public engagement, from her Oprah interview to her Spotify podcast to her appearances at women's summits and charity events, she has used personal storytelling as a tool. Not facts, not policies, stories. These stories are designed to present her as real, grounded, and deeply human, a stark contrast to the traditional image of royal stoicism and curated perfection that she left behind. But this strategy hinges on one thing: believability. The cooking scene, particularly the infamous 10-second stir, was not just a lapse in production judgment. It was a fatal blow to the brand Meghan has spent years cultivating. It took the abstract notion of authenticity and exposed the architecture underneath: the set design, the stylists, the off-screen coaching, the selective cuts, the lighting arrangements. What was meant to be a quiet, intimate portrait became a glaring example of performance disguised as presence. To understand the full scale of the damage, we must first understand how Meghan's image is constructed. Her narrative is built on contrast. She is the woman who left a rigid monarchy to find freedom, the biracial American outsider who faced institutional resistance and overcame it, the independent voice who rejected outdated protocols. But these contrasts only work if she is seen as emotionally sincere. That sincerity is what fuels public empathy and makes her story resonate. Without it, she is simply another wealthy celebrity performing hardship for applause. From her earliest interviews post-royal exit, Meghan spoke often about her desire to use her voice. Her choice of words has always been deliberate: vulnerability, healing, lived experience, being heard. These are powerful phrases loaded with emotional currency, and they are perfectly calibrated to the modern language of empowerment and identity politics. But over time, as her content became increasingly stylized and production-heavy, the gap between what she said and how she presented herself began to widen. The kitchen segment was never supposed to be controversial. On the surface, it was one of the tamest moments in the Netflix series. But it triggered the deepest reactions because it revealed that even Meghan's most mundane, supposedly candid moments were carefully orchestrated. In that moment, the question wasn't whether she was likable. It was whether she was real. And once the answer became maybe not, the floodgates opened. People started reevaluating every past moment. The Oprah interview, was it as unrehearsed as it appeared? The Spotify podcast, how many answers were pre-recorded? The charity photos, were they spontaneous or scheduled? Her speeches, written from the heart or fine-tuned by handlers? The power of the authenticity brand is its subtlety. It makes you feel like you're watching someone, not something. And when the illusion breaks, the viewer is left not only disillusioned but embarrassed for having believed it in the first place. This is what makes the fallout from the cooking scene so potent. It forced even her most casual fans to ask themselves, have I been emotionally manipulated? It's important to note that Meghan is not the only public figure to use authenticity as a strategy. Celebrities across industries have learned that relatability sells. From Instagram influencers to presidential candidates, everyone wants to be the person you could sit down and have coffee with. But very few have staked their reputations as completely on this narrative as Meghan has. For her, being perceived as real is not a bonus, it is the brand itself. And that brand is monetized. Whether it's through Netflix deals, book advances, or media appearances, the Meghan brand is built on the idea that you're seeing something rare and personal. A glimpse into the life of someone who has been through the fire and come out stronger, wiser, and more empathetic. She is not just telling her story. She is selling it. And that's what makes the question of authenticity so high stakes. Consider the visuals: Meghan in bare makeup, holding a baby in one arm and a laptop in the other. Meghan sitting in a sunlit office, journaling about resilience. Meghan walking barefoot through a garden, smiling with closed eyes. These images are carefully selected. They are edited and filtered to look unfiltered. And that paradox, the performance of non-performance, is the cornerstone of her public appeal. But there's a price to that kind of marketing. Once the audience begins to suspect that even the messiness is staged, the credibility vanishes. Not because people expect celebrities to live raw, unedited lives, but because they expect honesty about what is real and what is not. This is where Meghan's image management team seems to have miscalculated. In trying to present her as the ultimate embodiment of realness, they failed to leave any space for her to be just another figure creating content. And so, when the truth about the cooking scene emerged, there was no soft landing. No way to reframe the moment as a simple creative choice. It had been framed as truth. And truth, once broken, does not bounce back. Megyn Kelly's dismantling of the cooking scene gained traction because it wasn't just a personal critique. It was a takedown of the entire authenticity brand. And it came at a time when public trust in media personalities was already thin. Audiences were ready, perhaps even hungry, for someone to call out the performance. And once called out, they couldn't unsee the act. Even fans who tried to defend Meghan found themselves struggling with the contradiction. If she was truly committed to transparency, why not acknowledge the help? Why not feature the chefs? Why present the meal as hers when it wasn't? There are two possible explanations. One is strategic image control. The other is a fundamental misunderstanding of what audiences really value. Meghan's team may have believed that appearing to cook a meal herself would make her seem more grounded. But the truth is, showing herself collaborating with professionals, acknowledging the help, might have made her even more relatable. No one expects a Duchess-turned-media producer to be a master chef, but many respect someone who gives credit where it's due. Instead, the message that came through was one of artifice. Meghan didn't just present a curated image. She presented it as unscripted. And that is the fatal error in the authenticity game. What makes this moment so critical in Meghan's public arc is its lasting impact. The internet has a long memory, and the memes, commentaries, and parodies born from that 10-second stir are now part of her digital footprint. They will resurface with every new project she promotes, every new speech she gives. Every time she speaks about truth, voice, or vulnerability, someone will bring up the soup pot. It's not fair, but it's reality. And it's the cost of building a brand on authenticity. In a different world, Meghan might have owned the scene. She could have laughed about her limited cooking skills. She could have brought the chef on screen, celebrated the team behind the camera, and talked about the importance of collaboration. That kind of honesty would have enhanced her credibility, not hurt it. But instead, the moment was treated like a secret, a detail to be hidden. And in doing so, it became a liability. As we move into the next section, we'll examine how the public responded. Not just on social media, but in mainstream coverage, opinion columns, and cultural commentary. Because the loss of authenticity doesn't happen in silence. It reverberates through headlines, hashtags, and home conversations. And Meghan, whether she knows it or not, is no longer just managing a brand. She's managing fallout. Public reaction is never a monolith. It doesn't move in a single direction. It fractures, it spins, it flares up in every corner of the digital and physical world. But when the curtain was pulled back on Meghan Markle's staged kitchen scene, something happened that even seasoned media strategists didn't expect. The backlash wasn't confined to her critics. It didn't just come from the usual circles. It came from the middle, the moderate viewers, the casual fans, the neutral observers who once gave her the benefit of the doubt. And that's what made it dangerous. The public didn't just laugh. It turned. The divide was instant. Social media lit up within hours of Megyn Kelly's takedown. Hashtags like #KitchenGate, #FakeCookingScene, and #StageStir began trending globally on platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. For some, it was hilarious. For others, deeply disappointing. And for a vocal few, it was infuriating, not because of the content itself, but because of what it symbolized. An elite figure faking relatability for mass consumption. On Twitter, short-form commentary dominated. Some tweets were cutting and comedic. So I just watched Meghan Markle stir an empty pot like she was casting a spell on her reputation. 3 stylists, 2 chefs, and a lighting crew just to pretend you made spaghetti? Girl, no. Can someone tell Netflix this was a cooking cosplay, not a documentary? Others struck a more serious tone, questioning the ethics of presenting stylized content as truth. It's not about hating Meghan. It's about realizing we were lied to, and that the lie was sold as inspiration. I defended her for years. But this is embarrassing. This is manipulation dressed in a linen apron. Those voices mattered because they didn't come from tabloid readers or royal family loyalists. They came from people who had supported Meghan's move to leave the royal institution. People who bought into her narrative of escape and reinvention. People who watched the Netflix series to root for her, not critique her. The shift in tone from those corners was what turned this from a moment of mockery into a full-blown reputational crisis. TikTok took it further. Influencers began uploading side-by-side reactions, with one screen showing the Netflix kitchen scene and the other showing their own parody recreations, bad stirring, awkward smiles, and empty pots. One particularly viral clip featured a creator dressed as Meghan, dramatically stirring a visibly empty saucepan for 10 seconds before sighing and saying, "That's enough authenticity for today." It ended with the caption, "Netflix, give me my check." The humor cut deep because it mirrored what many viewers were thinking. It wasn't the lack of cooking skills that upset people. It was the theater, the performance of realness without the substance. And nothing spreads faster online than a moment that perfectly captures widespread disillusionment. Instagram Reels and meme pages also joined in. Screenshots from the cooking scene were layered with sarcastic text like, "Meal prep with Megyn. Step 1. Hire a crew of 10. And when you're rich enough to fake poor habits." Lifestyle influencers, many of whom built their own brands on cooking and home aesthetics, began to weigh in, comparing the reality of their kitchen routines to Meghan's edited version. Some did it jokingly, others pointedly. But the backlash wasn't confined to Gen Z memes or internet comedians. It seeped into more formal commentary. Mainstream media responded in a chorus of divided tones. Conservative outlets like the Daily Mail, Fox News, and The Sun ran headlines calling the scene phony, embarrassing, and a symbol of celebrity delusion. Op-eds described it as dishonest presentation, accusing Meghan of manipulating emotions to soften her image. But what surprised many was how even more centrist and liberal-leaning outlets began to shift their tone. The Washington Post ran a piece titled, "When Authenticity Becomes a Performance," highlighting how public figures like Meghan Markle blur the line between sincerity and strategy. Rolling Stone questioned whether Netflix had a duty to clarify staged scenes and docuseries promoted as raw and real. Even The Guardian, traditionally more sympathetic to Meghan, called the kitchen moment a misfire in messaging. None of these outlets declared Meghan a villain. They didn't attack her character or drag out her past. But they did something perhaps more significant. They withdrew their blind faith. They analyzed her like a brand, not a victim. And that shift in framing created space for more skeptical voices to be heard, without being immediately dismissed as hateful or biased. Cable news followed suit. Pundits from across the spectrum debated the significance of the scene. Was it just a harmless aesthetic choice? Or was it a calculated manipulation? On CNN, one anchor said, "Everyone stages content these days. But when you claim that content is your life story, it changes the stakes." On MSNBC, a panel discussed the ethics of unscripted television and whether Meghan had breached an unspoken trust with her audience. The most notable response, however, came from a surprising place: women's lifestyle and empowerment publications. These were the platforms that had once championed Meghan as a feminist icon, a role model for women navigating complex identities and public scrutiny. But after the cooking scene revelations, even some of those platforms distanced themselves. One editor from a prominent women's magazine, speaking anonymously, admitted they had pulled a planned profile on Meghan's authentic motherhood after the Netflix backlash. "It didn't feel right to run it anymore," she said. "Not until the dust settles." It was a quiet but meaningful shift, not a condemnation, but a pause, a withholding of endorsement. And in the world of public relations, silence from your former allies is as damaging as loud criticism from your enemies. On talk shows, the incident became joke material. Late-night hosts quipped about Meghan's cooking skills, or lack thereof. One skit showed a spoof Netflix trailer titled Meghan's Magical Kitchen, complete with laugh tracks and over-the-top direction. Another host sarcastically said, "You know you're relatable when your personal chef gets a stand-in chef." But beyond the jokes was a growing discussion about authenticity as a product and how celebrities manipulate narrative under the guise of vulnerability. Meghan had entered the cultural conversation not as a scandal figure, but as a symbol of the gap between truth and presentation. And people were now debating not just her actions, but what her actions said about the broader world of influencer politics, celebrity image crafting, and media accountability. In group chats, family dinners, and text threads, the question being asked wasn't, "Why did Meghan do this?" It was, "Why do we keep falling for it?" In the absence of a public response from Meghan or Netflix, speculation only intensified. Was the segment Meghan's idea or Netflix's? Did she push for the scene's inclusion? Or was she following a directive? Had the food team been instructed to remain uncredited? Was this simply a poorly thought-out moment, or a symptom of a deeper pattern of managed storytelling? The silence spoke volumes. And the longer the silence stretched, the more viewers assumed the worst. Reputationally, the damage was done not because of what Meghan did, but because of what she didn't do after. No correction, no humor, no humility, just ongoing promotion of a documentary now riddled with doubts. That decision solidified the backlash. Interestingly, the response from royal circles, both official and unofficial, was almost non-existent. Buckingham Palace did not comment. Royal commentators, however, subtly capitalized on the moment to bolster the contrast between Meghan and senior royals like Princess Catherine, who is known for her carefully moderated public presence. Comparisons were made between Catherine's quiet, unrehearsed appearances and Meghan's stylized docuseries. The message was implicit but effective. One is grounded, the other, curated. Cultural critics took it further, exploring how the Meghan backlash reflected a broader public fatigue with content that wears the mask of authenticity but is manufactured behind the scenes. Essays appeared in literary journals and digital think pieces, discussing the ethics of self-representation and whether celebrities like Meghan have a responsibility to delineate fact from fiction in their public storytelling. One writer summed it up this way: Meghan Markle's mistake wasn't stirring a pot. It was pretending that pot held more than it did. In the next section, we'll turn our attention to Netflix's role in shaping this illusion. Was the streaming platform complicit in the deception? Did they knowingly present a styled photo shoot as documentary truth? Or were they simply executing the vision given to them? Because when millions are watching, and the message is "this is real," the people behind the lens are just as accountable as those in front of it.